Watch this.
Yep, COVID cases are on the downward trend and vaccination numbers slowly heading the other direction. But what about the children? We spoke to the experts to find out if the kids are all right. He faced an outcry after trying to help Ammon Bundy forego COVID precautions in court and potentially criminal charges. But an Ada County commissioner is now in the clear. His music spanned decades and his legacy likely longer. It even hit the 208. A former member of Prince's pre-revolution days remembers the icon on his 63rd birthday. Since December, since the COVID-19 vaccine was first introduced in America, we've watched the age eligibility just drop from those most vulnerable, the elderly, to 65 and older, and then it went down incrementally from there, to now where anyone over the age of 12 can get a Pfizer COVID shot if they want one. But that still leaves a large portion of Idaho's population that isn't eligible. And that also has led to a lot of questions about that younger age group. Like, without a vaccine available, are we seeing more cases in those under 12? And what about hospitalizations? Are those numbers up too? Joe Paris spoke with Idaho health experts today about the data and what the situation looks like right now in the Gem State.
Thousands of Idahoans are now at least partially vaccinated. Close to 50% of Idahoans 18 and over have had at least one dose. Public health experts say they wish vaccination rates were higher, but they are optimistic about those numbers continuing to increase. One area of concern across the country is COVID rates among children under 12 who can't get the vaccine yet.
Certainly, there are some other states that either have reported that or are reporting it now.
Dr. David Pate is the retired CEO of the St. Luke's Health System and a member of the governor's COVID task force. He says Idaho is not a place currently seeing an issue with adolescent COVID cases. Pate says some recent good news came back in May when Pfizer got emergency clearance for use of their vaccine in a new age group, 12 to 16. About 13% of those aged 12 to 15 in Idaho have had at least one vaccine dose, and 24% of those 16 to 17 years old. Still, though, there's no vaccine for Idahoans younger than 12, leading to questions about COVID infections with kids. Experts point out their body will likely handle the virus okay, but there is another issue to keep in mind.
It is certainly unusual for a child to become very ill. But the concern is those children taking the virus home to their parents who may be more middle-aged and may have some underlying medical conditions and may not be vaccinated because they're thinking, oh, well, I'm not high risk, I don't need to get vaccinated. But now the child is bringing the virus home.
So what do the infection numbers look like for younger Idahoans unable to get a vaccine? This graph shows cases among 0 to 4-year-olds since early last year. You can see the cases spiked towards the end of 2020 but begin to decrease steadily through this year. The Department of Health and Welfare reports the incident rates for 0 to 4-year-olds over the last few weeks is about 16.5 cases per 100,000 population. The infection rate has plateaued in recent weeks in that age range. It's a very similar story for Idahoans age 5 through 12. Cases are about 19 per 100,000 population, with a mostly downward trend over the last 10 weeks. With that said, Health and Welfare reports despite no vaccine ready yet, they are not seeing an increase in COVID cases for those younger than 12.
Generally, it's been looking pretty favorable in Idaho.
Dr. Laura McGeorge is with St. Luke's Health System. She is the service line medical director for primary and specialty care. She says it's very important for those recently eligible teens and tweens to get a vaccine.
For a child or adolescent, the risk of hospitalization from COVID-19 is more than double the risk of hospitalization from influenza. So again, most kids are going to have a very mild case if they have symptoms at all. But again, we don't want them to spread it to other people that may be at more risk.
One demographic of concern is Idaho teenagers. Cases among teens, 13 to 17 years old, have shown a downward trend of cases in recent weeks, but still, teenagers have a higher incidence rate than younger kids at 37 per 100,000 population. It's important to note many in this age group only became eligible to get a vaccine about a month ago, but experts say it's important to get that group vaccinated to help cut down on community transmission and to help push towards a more normal school year beginning in the fall.
Before you know it, we'll be getting back into the mode of back to school. And so definitely don't procrastinate getting the kids vaccinated.
Everybody wants to get back towards normal in school. This is our way to do it. Let's get vaccinated so we can have a more normal school year next year.
Okay, Joe, COVID cases among kids, that's one thing. But what we've been talking about from the beginning of this pandemic, hospitalizations, whether the hospitals can, handle this, but hospitalization, if you're sick enough to go to the hospital, that's a big deal. What's that look like for kids in Idaho?
It's actually really been the same over the last several weeks and months. Really towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, we did see more under the age of 18 hospitalized. One thing that people follow is those MIS-C cases. That's a syndrome that was really prevalent among younger people that were infected with COVID. Now, the state of Idaho has seen 26 of those throughout this entire pandemic, and that's pretty close to what we've seen in Oregon and Washington. But if you look across the country, really back east and in the southern part of our country, they're seeing more and more of those MIS-C cases. So for now, Idaho looks like it's actually doing pretty well, but there is concern that as variants move across from east to west, there could be more issues going forward. Now, there's also been questions, Brian, about the case counts among adolescents.
I was going to ask you about that. The graph that you showed, it showed those numbers going down, but can we believe those are accurate?
There's reason to believe that there's being underreported, but there's nothing malicious behind that. I mean, point and simple, if you have a 5 or 6 year old that's home, that's a little sniffly, or maybe they may have allergies, you're not sure, you're likely not going to bring them in for a very invasive COVID test with the big thing up the nose and the whole thing. A lot of parents have just been keeping their kids home. So is it underreported? That's one way to look at it, but it's also the practical sense that they just may not be being reported. If one family member gets COVID, you assume the others have it, doesn't mean everybody went in. Again, nothing malicious, but those numbers that we're seeing are likely lower than what's actually in the community. Important to remember, the virus is still out there. If you're not vaccinated, experts say you got to mask up and you got to keep going with those great health hygiene that we've worked on over the last 18 months.
And what you said with these numbers going down, people maybe just assume if one person has it, the others might get it. Why put a child through that kind of invasive procedure? All right, thank you, Joe. They couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, so the Idaho Attorney General's office has decided to not pursue criminal charges against Ada County Commissioner Ryan Davidson. But they believe he needs training on how this whole separation of powers thing works. Back in March, the group, the Idaho 97, filed 2 complaints against Commissioner Davidson. One was because Davidson asked an Ada County judge to grant special permission to anti-government activist Ammon Bundy and allow him into the courthouse without a mask. Bundy and another man were there as defendants in a criminal jury trial for trespassing. Masks were required by the state Supreme Court in all courts across the state, and Bundy and his group of about 30 people, you see them there, they refused to wear them, so they weren't allowed in. And Bundy and the other man were subsequently arrested for failure to appear. Those warrants issued upstairs while this conversation was taking place downstairs. Davidson also admitted he asked the judge to quash those warrants if he could convince the defendants to come in wearing a mask. The judge said no. A second complaint was filed by Idaho 97 because they say the next day Commissioner Davidson asked the judge for paperwork related to Bundy's case, which seems strange to them. But because those documents are public record and the AG's office couldn't, or their investigation I should say, couldn't prove Davidson threatened the judge or tried to influence the outcome, nor were his requests made in private, well then there was no law broken. The Attorney General's office did say, however, that while they could not find sufficient evidence of a crime, they do not condone Commissioner Davidson's conduct. This office is unaware of any rule that would allow a county commissioner to involve himself in a pending criminal case, regardless of motivations. We will suggest that Commissioner Davidson receive training on how and when he can properly communicate with the judiciary in order to avoid even the appearance of impropriety in court proceedings, they went on. Mike Satz, the executive director of the Idaho 97, who filed those 2 complaints, he believes Davidson's behavior at the courthouse back in March was unacceptable and inappropriate, which is why he filed those complaints. However, he is extremely pleased with the AG's office engagement in such a thorough investigation. He says accountability of our public officials starts with transparency, and this proves that. As for Commissioner Davidson, he agrees, saying it is gratifying to have been cleared of any wrongdoing. No word yet, though, on if and when that suggested training will begin. Well, November 2022 could be a pivotal election in Idaho. Putting aside the contentious and competitive race for Idaho's governor and lieutenant governor positions, we could also see several initiatives on the ballot. Supporters, for one, are gathering signatures right now to try to decriminalize it, at least to some extent, the product of a plant that 34 other states have already legalized in some way. The Idaho Citizens Coalition is trying to legalize the drive, meaning they want to make it okay for Idahoans to take a small amount of marijuana from whatever other state to our west and bring it back into Idaho. The measure is called the Personal Adult Marijuana Decriminalization Act. The kids call it PAMDA, I believe. Essentially, if passed, it would be legal for Idahoans to cross the border into Oregon or Washington, buy less than 3 ounces of weed from a legal dispensary, and then bring it back to their home. You would have to be 21 or older, and this wouldn't legalize marijuana as a whole in the state. This is just for personal use on private property. Organizers argue this measure strikes the right balance by keeping government out of people's personal lives. Dealing, growing, and advertising marijuana would still be illegal, but respects those Idaho adults who would rather, say, prefer smoking weed over drinking alcohol. The Idaho Citizens Coalition says this measure is meant to be a backup to the Idaho Medical Marijuana Act that they are also trying to get passed. But since the legislature made signature gathering for initiatives more difficult this past session with the passing of Senate Bill 1110, it's an even more of an uphill battle. That was the one that made ballot initiative signatures come from 6% of voters in all 35 districts instead of just 18. The point was to increase voter involvement in the process, we were told. Critics call it overkill and almost impossible. But that means they'll need nearly 65,000 signatures from every corner of the state in less than a year's time to get this measure on the ballot by the May deadline. This law is also still being challenged in court, but it is in effect while that gets resolved, which means in order to legalize the drive, they may have to drive to every district in the state to get your signatures. Oh, and one other thing that just hit me. If only it was marijuana, then you could call it the Panda Act. I know. The artist, or the artist formerly known as, well, you probably just know him as Prince. One Boise woman knew him better than that, before Prince was a household name. You don't have to make it purple, but why not rain down some messages to our text line? 208-321-5614 is the number. We just need your name to go along with that. What is something that is unique to Idaho? Tell us, ask us, share with us. We're always curious about what's happening around the 208. Include the 208 hashtag, and we might even read yours at the end of the show.
I mean, he was a wonderful soul. I miss him, and I wish he was still around because he was such an inspiration to so many and so helpful to so many.
Gail Chapman was a 21-year-old struggling musician in 1978. Hoped to one day get a full-time gig with a band. She was living in Minnesota and even auditioned for a local up-and-coming artist named Prince, who was putting together a band. But then she'd heard nothing and had resorted to delivering pizzas to help pay the bills. Then one day, 3 months after her audition, she was awoken from a nap by a phone call. It was Prince, asking if she could be at rehearsal in an hour. Well, she was an hour and 15 minutes away. but she made it there in 45. And that's how Gail Chapman became a founding member of the band that would one day become the Revolution, as in Prince and the Revolution. Well, today the legendary musician would have been 63 years old. In April of 2016, Prince died at the age of 57 from a fentanyl overdose. Gail left the band in 1980, before it really became big. Did you know she eventually made her way to Boise and has lived here since 1987? Well, at 64 years old, Gail says she doesn't dwell on this day, this birthday of one of the most influential artists of all time. But when friends call and message her, it makes the singer-songwriter nostalgic for the days she did get to spend with the Purple One.
How do you say, baby, I want you?
For decades, Gail Chapman was known around the Boise music scene as, well, Gail Chapman. Then social media became a thing, and Gail's past became known too.
People saying, "Are you the one?" And I go, "Yeah, I am."
It was 1978 when Gail became the only woman in Prince's first touring band.
Well, there was Prince, Andre on bass, there was me and Matt on the keyboards, and then Bobby Rivkin on the drums.
They were the precursor to the iconic Prince and the Revolution.
He was a young man with a heart when I knew him, and a soul, and he was a great guy, very funny. He had a wonderful personality.
And they were friends.
People wonder if we had more of a relationship. No, we didn't.
Although for some, photos painted a different picture.
I think the thing that's funny about those pictures is even the band wasn't aware that he was going to do that. I knew, I thought they knew, but they didn't know, apparently, until it happened, and then they were kind of upset.
That played little part in Gail deciding to step away from the band in 1980.
I needed space to grow my own abilities. It was his gig. It was his fame. We were part of his crew. So it's either stay until he boots me out or go live your own dream, which is kind of what I did.
And Gail rarely looked back, but she did realize who Prince would become going forward.
After I quit, I moved from Minneapolis to New York City. People would say, "So you're a musician? Okay, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I just got off touring with Prince." And they go, "Who?" And I go, "I know, never mind. You'll hear about him, don't worry. He's gonna be huge."
Gail's not surprised, he still is.
But I'm glad that people remember him. He was special. He cared about people. He wasn't afraid of anything.
Gail said she remembers Prince and the Revolution came to New York while she was there in the mid-'80s. She went backstage to say hi to everyone, and that was the last time she saw Prince, she says. Gail moved to Boise in 1987. It was either here or Arkansas, she told me. And she told her husband there was no way she was moving to Arkansas. So when he asked her where she wanted to go, she went, Pocatello, Idaho. And that lasted about 7 months. Her marriage lasted a bit longer. Gail still plays gigs around the Treasure Valley. In fact, she has a Sunday brunch show coming up on the 27th at the Riverside Hotel. Sure, we just set a record last week with the earliest 100-degree day in June, but this time last year, they were making snowballs in Idaho's mountains. You have any photos you want to send us? You know, our text line is open. We're also accepting your questions and comments and even your complaints. 208-321-5614. Make sure you include your name and the hashtag #the208. That way we can give you and your photos the proper credit when we show them around the state.
Love them.
For those of us that were thinking triple digits so early in the month of June was just too hot too soon, this is much more like it for this time of year. This is where we should be, at least according to our 30-year climatological averages, with a high in Boise, or at least so far a high in Boise of 79 degrees. That's our current temperature right now. Overnight tonight, not quite as cool as the last couple of nights, but still refreshingly cool. So open up the windows, let the fresh air in if allergies aren't a problem for you. It will be just a little bit breezy overnight tonight, and then we get to do it all over again tomorrow. 78 to 84 will be the range in temperatures for the Treasure Valley. Here's a look at the highs to expect for tomorrow. Low 80s for the Magic Valley, low 70s for our mountain valleys. We're sort of in an in-between area right now. The cooler air to the northwest of us, the warmer air to the southeast of us. But eventually this pool of cool air will push in our direction for Thursday, bringing about some unsettled conditions as well. So watch as we move through the timeline here. This is our jet stream wind flow that you're looking at upstairs in the atmosphere. And this is that low pressure trough that swings into place across our region for the day on Thursday. It will bring about some cooler temperatures, also some scattered showers and the possibility of some isolated thunderstorms. So futurecast showing the cloud cover passing from tomorrow into Wednesday. It isn't until late Wednesday that we start to see the showers turning on for us, and then into Thursday continuing through the first half of the day. Even some high elevation snow. That's how much cooler it gets. Here's a look at the 7-day forecast. If you were thinking you're missing the summer-like warmth, we have it in store for us getting into next week. For a fresh forecast, you can find it at ktvb.com.
I mean, all you have to do is look at those 7-day temperatures and know that things change, I should say, quite easily here in Idaho when it comes to the weather and the temperatures. Sure, the cooler temperatures are coming in the next few days, but just last week on Thursday, we set a record for the hottest June 3rd in state history. 103 degrees, still not even summer yet. But you know, Idaho still not known for sticking to the script. And funnily, let's try that again. Funny enough, it was 1 year ago exactly today, Idaho saw 7 inches of snow in the mountains. June 7th, snow in the mountains, people building snowmen. Well, June 7th this year, not really that going to happen, but people more likely heading to the river. So you can see things kind of move around a lot, right? But to highlight just how drastic the change is, we found some photos you sent us last year compared to the posts our Idaho weather watchers have posted over the past couple of days. Here's the Gem State, 1 year apart from your point of view. All right, final moments of the show. Let's get right to your comments. With all the impropriety that Ryan Davidson has been accused of over the past 2 years, you'd think he'd be in prison if he actually did the things that the press and local establishments said. Luckily, we had competent investigators. The AG's office not calling it criminal, but they don't actually condone it either. Wonderful story about Gail Chapman. Since I knew her from the Humane Society years ago, it's great to see she still has animals and plays music. She does. 2 cats, 2 dogs. We'll see you tomorrow.